This is PA961. This little presentation is going to take just a little, probably around a half an hour, so not too long. But I want to kind of give you the layout of the land for PA961 and then kind of explain to you what happens in 962 and 963. These classes are a little bit harder than 960 because you're not going to get feedback from me on an everyday, on a weekly basis like you're used to in 960. So it's going to really rely on you as you're working through this. If you have any questions, that you reach out to me in between the weeks if you have anything that you don't understand or you have questions about. So this is more of a self-driven class. There's going to be 2 papers in it, and then there's going to be little weekly educational things for you to do just to kind of keep you honest and keep you on track. So this is kind of the roadmap of PA961. So in 960, ideally, you've come up with a topic. Now, I know some of you guys are thinking about changing and changing your topic and stuff, and that's fine. The earlier you change your topic, the better. But the way the program is built, again, is so that you build. So you've already, if you're happy with your topic from 960, now you're just going to continue to look for literature. You're going to continue writing bits and pieces of the paper. So really 961 is really all about picking your help and picking the journal that you choose. So one of the things that you're going to do is you're going to pick a journal that you would like to eventually publish in. Now keep in mind, in order to graduate from the program, you do not have to get published in a journal. But your paper does have to be of publishable quality, because I've had people go through here and say, yeah, I'm really not interested in being published. And that's fine, but you still have to pick a journal, and then you also have to write it to the level of what anybody else would write it to if they're trying to get something published. So you pick a journal, and then you have to start looking at the author guidelines. So the second line right here is talking about things that you would find in the author guidelines. And each journal has author guidelines, and you have to Google, say, you want JAPA author guidelines, or clinician reviews, author guidelines, and you should be able to easily find them. Then you have to start reading them. So you have to figure out what's the journal's target audience, what type of article are you submitting, what's the word count, maximum and minimums, is there abstract required, and what writing style is required. So from this point on, AMA is the writing style. But let's say you pick a topic and a journal that says that they want you to write in APA. You will be allowed to switch to APA at this point in time. And I will grade your stuff based on APA requirements. But I will tell you, the vast majority of people are going to continue writing in AMA. The few exceptions are somebody wants to submit to like journals that are from the psych realm. Psych continues to write in APA. So you've got your research topic already picked, and then you have to look at what are the ingredients of the article. What does your what does your journal require as far as ingredients? Again, some require an abstract, some don't. What's the introduction requirements, main body, conclusion, references, and then you're going to start putting together tables and figures, which we're going to talk about here in just a second. And keep in mind that journals typically do not count the references in their word count, and they don't count the abstract in their word count. So whenever you come up with a word count, you have to let me know the abstract does or does not count, the references does or does not count. And typically they do not count, but you may find a journal that it does. So you have to pay attention to those things. And you're going to, again, get all that out of the author's guidelines. Does your journal require methods and discussions? Sometimes they will require you to write your methods. Sometimes they won't. So this is kind of like where we're going overall, big picture. Now we're going to break it down week by week. So in weeks 1 through 4, you're going to have little weekly tidbits of information to help you along the way, to help you become a better writer. But realistically, there are no assignments due until week 4. So on weeks 1 through 4, it's your duty to kind of look at those tidbits in those little nuggets of information in each of those weeks, and to start writing a paper that's required for 4. Now, the example for the paper is in week 3. So as you go through this, you will see the examples generally come 1 or 2 weeks ahead of when they're due, because we want you to start looking at the examples before you start writing. So we put them in the weeks prior. So please, please, please look at the example. Now, one thing that I always say to you guys, and I'm going to reiterate it here, is that the example papers are not 100% perfect. They are there for you to be able to get an idea of what the paper should look like, what we're requiring. You may find an AMA error, or you may find a punctuation error. Again, these are just prior students that we put these papers in there for you to have like a vision in your mind of what the thing should look like. I do want you to use the examples as your template. And the reason why that is, we go to specific sections to look, okay? Did they identify how many words are required for their article? Did they require, or did they state that yes, PAs could be primary authors? And I'm going to certain sections looking for these things. So we do want you to stay true to what the examples and templates look like, okay? Any questions on that? And again, they're not 100% perfect. So in week 4, the paper that is due in week 4 is called the Topic and Advisory Committee Submission. And in that, you're going to come up with an official title for your project. You're going to identify the journal that you want to submit to, and you're going to detail the journal's author instructions. You're going to tell me what size font, what style of font, what's the word count for the type of article that you have chosen. Can PAs be primary authors? Now I'm going to tell you, like obviously JAPA, that's a no-brainer, but I had people put other journals that I'm not familiar with down, and then I would have to go Google the author instructions, and lo and behold, it says only MDs and DOs can submit. So that's some of the things that you're pulling out and you're putting in your paper. You're literally writing the word count for a special topics paper for JAPA is blah, blah, blah. The required font is blah, blah, blah. So that is telling me, and you're doing this because I want you to dig into the author instructions and find all this information. Are there any special instructions regarding figures and tables, etc.? Any kind of special instructions you should put in this paper. So the Topic Advisory Committee paper lays the groundwork for your journal article, and it includes all the elements that your journal requires. So you see there, I put example abstract, keywords. So some journals require you to have an abstract, and then some journals will dictate what your abstract should look like. So it may say 150 words. It may say must have at least 5 keywords. Those are just examples. So you have to read. And if your journal does not require an abstract, just write abstract and then put not required, okay? Listen to what I'm saying. I want you guys pay attention right here. The example does not have an abstract. Why is that? Because we did not put an abstract in there, because you have to look at your journal and find out what the requirements are. We didn't want people to blindly copy the abstract that format that they see in the example paper, so there's no abstract in there. You need to go to your journal and see what the requirements are. If it says less than 200 words, then you need to have it less than 200 words. If it says 150 words with at least 5 keywords, that's what you need to write. If it requires you to write methods and conclusion, that's what you need to set your abstract up to look like. The next thing about abstracts, and I'm going to say it today and I'll say it a million times from now, and people will still do this. You do not reference in an abstract traditionally. And the reason why that is the abstract is meant to be a standalone item that does not have references with it. So you can just pull the abstract out and post that. And if you start referencing something, there's no reference page to go to. So that's why you don't typically reference in an abstract. Now, your journal may ask you to do, I doubt that, but if your journal says reference in the abstract, reference in the abstract, but I highly doubt it. So there should be no references in your abstract. The next thing that is unique about an abstract and the body of the paper is, again, they're two standalone items. So if you use an abbreviation, so remember, one of the rules of AMA is before you use an abbreviation, even if it's very, very common, you have to spell it out first. So PCOS. So if you use PCOS, you have to write it out. You have to put it, then PCOS in parentheses, and then every time after that, you can use that abbreviation. Anything that you abbreviate in the abstract, you start over and do the same thing in the body of the paper. So if you identified PCOS, you start over and you have to identify it again in the body of the paper, because again, the two can be separated. So the paper can be a standalone without the abstract. So those are the two biggest errors people make about the abstract, is not re-identifying terms in the body of the paper that they've abbreviated in the abstract, and then also referencing in the abstract. So don't make those two errors. And then in the paper, you want to outline your main points in specific detail. In the second paper, you're going to be even more detailed than in the first paper, but you're trying to just like let the reader know this is generally what my paper is going to talk about. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to identify advisory committee members. And with the advisory committee members, you're going to list the person's name and their credentials, their current place of employment and position, and what area of expertise that they will lend to your project. So we don't want to just have you say Marissa Lawrence, she's my great buddy. You're going to put Dr. Marissa Lawrence is a plastic surgeon who works at Northside Hospital. She's been a practicing plastic surgeon for 27 years, blah, 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 blah. And so you're going to go into detail. How is this person going to help you? Now, the advisory committee can be very diverse, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. And then finally, the last real big piece of this is, as an appendix, you are going to include the author's guidelines for the journal that you pick. So if you pick JAPA, you're going to write your paper, you're going to put your reference page in, and then you're going to put your appendix in. And in your appendix, you're going to cut and paste the author's guidelines directly into the paper. Now listen to this piece too. I don't want you futzing with it. Just paste it in there. I don't want you reformatting. I don't want you to take off hyperlinks. I don't care what it looks like in the appendix, just drop it in there. There's nothing special. The only reason why we have you do that is if I have a question, we used to have to go and Google all these authors' guidelines. Just put it in there so I can go and answer any question that I might have about the journal that you're getting ready to publish in. Again, don't worry about the formatting. Literally just drop it in there. How it lands in the appendix is how it lands. I don't care, just as long as I can read it. As long as it's legible and I can read it, that's all I care about. Does anybody have any questions on that piece about the author's guidelines? I had somebody say they spent 2 hours trying to format the author's guidelines. I said, no, don't do that. So you guys might ask yourself, who should be on my advisory committee? So there are 3 people that I generally recommend to help you out through 3 different categories. The first one is most important, your subject matter expert, someone in the field who knows a whole lot about the topic that you're writing on. And it doesn't matter their credentials. It can be an MD, a DO, a PA, a nurse practitioner, a psychologist, a social worker. So like some of those mental health papers, we see a lot of social workers and psychologists. So you should have at least one subject matter expert. The second one is those people who complement your weaknesses. So if you're not good at catching your own errors, have an editor. If you're not good at grammar, have a grammar guru. So you have to look at your writing and know as a writer, what are your weaknesses? And then you will try and find somebody who complements your weaknesses. And then this is just an example. This is not a requirement, but this is who I use. I typically have a medical librarian who helps me. And I like a medical librarian because they can typically find articles that I cannot. And people will ask me, well, how do you find a medical librarian? If you work at a hospital, a lot of times they have medical librarians. At your former PA program library, if you're affiliated with another hospital or university system, you might be able to get some help there. And then our medical librarians can help you as well. But those are just suggestions. You can have anybody. The next thing people says, can I have my husband? Can I have my wife? Can I have, my girlfriend? If they're going to contribute and help your paper be better, that's perfect. And I always laugh. Spouses are some of the toughest critics on you. So, there's nothing wrong with that. So how do I find author guidelines? You just Google it. So JAPA author guidelines, clinician review author guidelines, the dermatology journal guidelines, and you should be able to easily find them. And again, this is kind of what the front page of the JAPA guidelines look like, but it's just, you just Google it. So a couple of things about writing. We teach you how to write, but JAPA and clinician reviews both have a really nice article on roadmap to better writing. And if I could, I would make this a required reading assignment for this class. This is a team talk class, so I can't do that. But I would highly, highly recommend that you guys all look at this roadmap to better writing. Clinician Reviews has something that is very similar, and I would recommend that you look at both of them. And it literally takes less than 20 minutes to read, but it's like a whole bunch of knowledge packed into one little informational brochure. So you'll keep going. You turn in that paper in week 4. It will generally come back to you about week 5 with any suggestions, questions. If you do something like just not put an abstract on, I'm going to return the paper to you ungraded, and I'm going to tell you to fix it, because the whole goal, again, is to write this bits and pieces, and I need to see those things. So week 10, the goal of this assignment is to prepare everything that you will need to finish writing your journal article for PA962 and for your polished article in PA963. So the article, or this paper, includes elements, and it's called a project plan. So the project plan includes the title page, the body of your paper, your citations or references, and your appendix. So to dive a little bit deeper into that, you're going to briefly restate your topic and the rationale on why you think this topic's important. You're going to identify your target audience. Now, I know this sounds a little silly, but you don't want you don't want to say, okay, I'm writing a paper on dermatology, and you're going to submit it to the orthopedic PA journal. And I will give you a prime example. I had a student a couple of terms back say he was going to submit to the PAEA, which is the PA Educators Journal, and he was writing a topic on how to care for low back pain. And I kept explaining to him that PAEA focuses on education. It doesn't focus on clinical topics. So at that point, I had to kind of redirect him. All right. So again, in this paper, you're going to reaffirm your journal. Okay, so this part is going to look very much like the paper before. And you're like, well, didn't we just do that? Why are they asking us to do that again? Some people's journal will end up changing based on my feedback, like that particular student. I said, no, you can't do PAEA for this topic. You got to do another journal. So go pick another journal and make it, match the target audience. So we're just basically asking you to reaffirm the journal that you want to write to, and then this time you can just include the link to the author's instructions. We're not going to have you re-drop that in as an appendix, because again, the vast majority of you guys are going to keep the same journal. And again, state that PAs can be first authors, reaffirm, is it AMA style, APA style, reaffirm font and type, is an abstract required, and has anything been published on your journal recently in the journal you selected. So again, if you want to do something about ketamine and low back pain, and you said you want to submit to JAPA, and 2 months ago, somebody else just submitted, you're not going to be successful in that. So I'm going to redirect you to pick another journal again. So, so again, this is kind of a reaffirmation process. And then your journal pick should support the target audience. So again, if you're writing something about dermatology, then the Journal of Dermatology Physician Assistants, JDPA, would be an appropriate place to submit to. Any questions on that part? So that section, that name your journal and stuff, there's a few little tweaks to that. And the tweaks are, you know, has anything been published recently? Is an abstract required? Those few little tweaks are in there, but it's pretty much a rehash of what you've already done if your journal did not change over the course of this class. Any questions on that? You're also, in this one, you're going to clarify what type of article you're writing. So for instance, in JAPA, they have different types. So there's a special topics, there's a clinical review article, there's a CME article, there's a case study. You have to tell me what type of article you're writing, and with that, what is the word count? And does the word count require, does the reference page count in the word count? Does the abstract count in the word count? Now, why am I having you do this? This is what happens every year, every term. So you tell me in PA961 that you're writing a clinical review article, and you tell me that a clinical review article for JAPA, the word count is 2,500 to 3,500 words. And then you get into 962 and you don't do what you're supposed to, and you put everything off to the last minute, and then you throw a paper together really, really quickly, and it has 700 words. I'm going to go back to you and I'm going to return your paper to you in PA 962 and say, this does not match your project plan. This word count is sorely short, redo it. And again, this is your groundwork for what 962 is. And so this is you laying the groundwork, and then you have to follow through. So any questions on that? So each journal has different article types, and each article type has different requirements. So you have to know that. And I swear to you, in PA 961 and in PA 962, I'll have 5 people between those two classes. I'll have 5 people ask me how long their paper should be. And I'm telling you right here, I can't tell you that. Your journal tells you that, and this is where you clarify it. You say, this is what I'm doing, and this is what my word count is. So please, please, please don't send me an email and say, how many words should my paper be? You tell me. You're telling me right here in week 10. And then in week 10, you're going to write a detailed outline of your article. It should include all major elements of the journal's author instructions that are required. So if it says you will need an abstract, introduction, and then a discussion, and then a conclusion, you should have all those elements. But under the discussion, you should be very detailed. You should say discussion, and you should say pathophysiology, diagnosis, imaging, treatment, whatever is appropriate. So I want to, in my head, be able to picture what this paper is going to look like at the end. So I should have a pretty good idea by looking at week 10's outline what your your final paper should look like. Does somebody have a question? Okay. So for the article's main body, you should include subheadings in the outline. So like if you say pathophysiology and then treatment, and there are 2 treatments, then you should have subheadings, treatment A, treatment B. So just, it should be a very detailed outline. And what I'll do is when we get closer to week 8, we have an example posted. I think you guys all know I did this program as well. And I'm not quite through with it, almost, but I will send out my paper as an example as well as the one that's posted. I'll send that out to this class. So week 10 also, we have you start thinking about and building. Thinking about and building is the key point here. Key tables and figures. So what does a table do and what does a figure do? It allows you to put in a lot of information into a small area by putting in key tables and figures, and it really just augments the paper. So what we're going to have you do is we're going to have you start building the tables and the pictures. And so the reason why we have you do this here is because people usually struggle with following all the AMA requirements for doing tables and graphs and whatnot and figures. So we want to see them here so that we can correct mistakes that we see. So when you go into 962, those mistakes are already corrected. Now, let's say your ultimate goal is maybe to have 5 tables or figures, but right now you only have 2 generated. That's fine. I want to get an idea that you understand like what they look like and the rules. In one of the week's readings, it talks about the rules that go with tables and figures. And if that's not enough, you guys all should be able to access the AMA style guide, and it's edition 11. You should all be able to access that through the university library. So there's no excuse like, well, I don't know how to do it. You have access to the learning material that we put in Moodle, but you also have access to the AMA style guide. And then the final 2 elements is the reference page and the appendix. Now follow with me here. On this reference page, you put down all the references you use to complete this assignment. So you'll have maybe a couple of articles, journal articles. You probably will have a reference referencing the author guidelines to your paper. You may have a couple of references to pictures, but on the appendix, what we want you to do is we want you to list all the references that you could potentially use for your completed paper in PA962. So for instance, when I did my week 10 paper, I probably had maybe 6 or 7 references, but in my appendix, I probably had 22 references. And so why do we have you do this? This gives me a chance to look at all of your references before you get to 962. Why did we implement this? We would have people write papers, and when they got done, 90% of their references were from secondary sources. And let's talk about secondary sources versus primary sources. Secondary sources are things like up-to-date, textbooks. We want you using journal articles that are published that are preferably within 5 years. That's the next thing. We would have people who all of their references were 10 and 15 years old. So this allows me to take a look at your references and make sure that your references are up to standard for you to complete and finish the paper in 962. So any questions about that? That seems to kind of blow people's minds sometimes. So you'll have the reference paper, which has all the references that you're going to use to complete that assignment. And then the appendix is going to have all the references that you potentially could use. Now, does that mean you go on to 962 and you find this really awesome article that you didn't have in 961 and can you go ahead and use it? Absolutely. But this just gives me a chance to look at the vast majority of your references before we get into 962. Any questions on that? So again, there's an example paper. You can find it in week 8. And so I want you to make sure you're looking at that. And so your paper should be set up very much like the example paper. So what have you accomplished so far? You've been all the way through 960, 961. So you should have constructed your title page. And I want to point out a couple of things because these are things that people mess up on. In the header, you should actually have something that says running head, just like you see there, capital R, the rest small, colon, and then you should have a shortened version of the title of your project. Titles on the title page, it shouldn't say assignment 1 as the title. It should say something about your paper, menstrual migraine headaches. And then that's a pretty short title in and of itself. So in the heading, it should say menstrual migraine headaches, and all of the words should be capitalized. And in that header, you should also see a page number. And I have people mess this up all the time. Either they leave the running head off, or they add the running head and they don't capitalize the all the words of the shortened title, or they don't shorten the title at all. So I like a 14-word title up there in the running head. It should be a shortened version. And then, of course, the page number should be justified over to the right. Any question on that? The other thing, the examples, I think sometimes will have like Tom Coletti's name or Elise Watkins' name. You shouldn't put their name. I'm your instructor. So it should be your name, your credentials, my name, my credentials. So you've constructed your title page. You should have written your abstract, and it should be formatted in accordance with the journal that you picked. You should have picked a journal. You should have picked an article type, and with that article type, you should have determined your word count. Does the references count? Does the abstract count? You should have assembled your writing team. So that's your advisory committee. I always get questions about co-authors. So you should be the one who's doing the vast majority of this work, but some people help out and they do reach the level of co-authorship. So in one of the weeks, I think it's maybe week 4 or so, it says, you know, should you acknowledge your help or should you give them co-authorship? They have to reach the level of co-authorship. And there's a link there that kind of explains what co-authors do and what you have to do. So if somebody's just reading over it for grammar and making a few grammar errors, that does not reach the level of co-authorship. But if somebody's, you know, doing substantial input into it, you can make those people co-authors. If you choose not to do a co-author, which you're not wrong in if you're doing the heavy lifting of this, you can just do an acknowledgement at the end of your paper. You should also have constructed an outline of your paper, and then you should also have formatted all of the references that you potentially could use, and that's the appendix in assignment 2. So as you can see, we've written bits and pieces in 961, and then we're going to put it all together in 962. Any questions about that? So weeks 11 and 12 are light weeks. You're just going to have a university evaluation of the course, and then a course wrap-up post, kind of like what you liked best and what you learned from the class. So we try to keep these 2 weeks lined up. I do want to tell you guys, I'm not sure if you're aware or if you've kind of figured this out. Week 10, 9 and 10 are usually big weeks, and there are major projects due in almost every single class. And so we have a lot of grading. So the grading gets a little bit slower, whereas before I might turn something around in a week's time. It may be a week and a half before you get this back, or 2 weeks, because I have major papers due in all the other classes that I teach as well. So the Wilmer Writing Center, some of you guys have already used this. I just want to make a note that that the Wilmer Writing Center is not an editing service. They are not going to catch every single grammatical and formatting error, and they are not generally well versed on AMA. Some are, better at AMA than others, but they're more well versed on APA. So they're there to help correct big picture problems, help you with writing clearer, and they're not going to pick apart your paper and hand it back with red marks all over. They're there for big overall writing improvements, and they try to, pick a couple of things with each paper for you to work on for next time. So don't turn this into Wilmer thinking that it's an editing service. If you need an editing service, then hire an editing service, and you're going to have to find that person on your own and pay them outside of here. Some people do need editors. I'm not a poor writer, but I just know that I was busy and I didn't have time to really do a whole bunch of editing. And so I hired an editor all the way through my doctoral program. Not saying that you have to, but it's one less thing off your plate, but know that the Wilmer Writing Center is not the answer for that, if that's what you're looking for. You do have to make an appointment. You need to make the appointment about 72 hours before the day that you actually want to turn in the paper. And the way you make that appointment is you email writingcenterga@lynchburg.edu. So in 962, you're going to start hearing about this thing called the Lynchburg Journal of Medical Science. And it is not an actual journal. It's not like JAPA. It's not like clinician reviews. It's not like any journal. It's just a fake journal that has been created that allows you to get the steps down of what it's like to actually publish in a real journal. And you're going to get communications back saying, here, this is back for you for revision and those kind of things. So in 962, 963, you're going to start submitting things to this fake journal. This does not prevent you from submitting to a real journal, and this does not count as a real submission to a peer-reviewed journal. This is a fake journal, fake journal, fake journal. So people get confused about that, and they'll say, oh, I got published. That's the first thing. Or they'll say, oh, I can't go ahead and send this to JAPA now that I've sent this to Journal of Medical Science. So it's a fake journal. You can continue on submitting to the journal that you have chosen. But it's just a way for you to get the feel of what really happens in the publishing world. Does anybody have any questions on that?
Hi, yes. I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Who is this? Who's speaking?
Is there like a website can we see other, I know it's not a real journal, but is there any place that we can log into, or can we see other papers that people have done?
Honestly, you can actually, I think there is, and I can try and, I know there is. What that is, the address, I do not know. I also, this is a good intro to the next part of this. Alex Cash is the person who manages the Journal of Medical Science. And I'm the person who grades papers. So when you have Journal of Medical Science questions like, oh, did my submission go through and all that stuff, those are really generally Alex Cash questions. And what I ask you to do is email myself and Alex so that I know that you have a question out there and that it got answered. But she's the one who is the quote unquote editor. And so she's the one who's behind the scenes, like sending you your peer review assignments and whatnot. You can probably Google this right now, because I will tell you, we have people all the time reach out to us. Like we had somebody from Germany reach out to us and say, hey, we can see this abstract of a paper that one of your students wrote. Can we see the whole paper? And so I know that just really the general public can get to those abstracts because just by Googling, but I will try and get you the link. And yes, we quote unquote publish at the end of each term. So whenever you come up to 963, you'll get a link saying, hey, here's the link to the journal. But let me get the link for you. I will put it in a post in the class announcements so you guys can look at that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So yeah, I don't know, like, and and none of the faculty for that matter, we are totally outside of the publishing world. We work with you within Moodle, and Ms. Cash works with you within the Journal of Medical Science. So looking forward to PA962, what is that going to look like? So you're going to have your completed paper that's due in week 9. You'll have to run it through a plagiarism software. And it's right now, this term we're using Turnitin, but by the time you get there, it may be something else. And you also have to submit it to Moodle after you've ran it through the plagiarism software. PA961 is the groundwork for 962. So the harder you work in 961, the more you fill in your paper, the more you fill in the writing, the easier 962 becomes. So that's just a word of warning. And in 962, the only assignment is that one assignment in week 9. And you have to set up a writing schedule, and you have to make time to write. This is the first thing that gets pushed off to the side whenever you start having other assignments. So in PA 963, you will submit your paper. Well, let me back up for a second. In 962, you'll submit your paper to me in Moodle, and I will grade it, and I will give you my feedback. You will take my feedback at the end of 962, and you'll have a couple of weeks to make any final changes based on my feedback or based on any feedback that your advisory committee has given you. And then about week 2 or 3, you will have to submit that revised paper to the Lynchburg Journal of Medical Science. And what happens is, behind the scenes, the editors, aka Alex Cash, will assign you a paper to a peer review. And you will, it's generally a blinded submission, so you won't know who's your peer reviewing, and the person who's peer reviewing yours won't know who wrote it. And you make comments, and then you submit it, the peer review, and then Alex Cash will swap and give you your feedback. At that point in time, you will have gotten feedback from 3 people: me, your advisory committee, and your peer reviewer. At that point in time, you'll make any final corrections, and then you will resubmit it to the Lynchburg Journal of Medical Science as a final end product. So let me talk about when people critique your paper. So in the real publishing world, there are going to be people who say, oh, it would be better if you said this, or hey, I think you should add X, Y, or Z. And those are all optional changes. There are going to be times when you get your paper back and they're going to say, you absolutely have to change this. This reference is wrong, or this is stated incorrectly. So they're going to be hard changes, and then they're going to be soft suggestions. And so the peer review is kind of like that. So sometimes people come and say, well, do I have to make the changes that my peer reviewer said? No, you don't have to make the changes that your peer reviewer said. And one of the other things that you have to understand about peer review, in the real peer review process, we would give an orthopedic PA an orthopedic paper. We would give a cardiology PA a cardiology paper. Well, we're just randomly swapping papers in this process. So I may give a plastic surgery PA a cardiology paper, and a cardiology PA may go to an occupational medicine PA. And so you may not have the content expertise. So as far as your peer reviewer feedback, take it with a grain of salt if you want to. Make the changes if you think they're valid, and move on. Once you have graduated, you can submit your journal article to the journal of your choice. It's not required that you do submit to an outside journal in order to graduate from the DMSC program. Has everybody got that clear? Any questions on that piece? Okay, so tips for success: you need to set up a writing schedule. And guys, please, 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 please read your paper out loud. You read your paper out loud. Swap, give it to a friend, have the friend read it out loud. You will catch the vast majority of your mistakes if you just read your paper out loud. You don't even need anything fancy like Grammarly or RefWorks. All those tools are excellent, but again, just reading it out loud catches a lot of the errors. Have someone else read it. Have someone else read your paper. And I'm going to say, and I know you all know this, but you know what you meant to write. And even though it's written incorrectly, you read what you think you wrote. And I do that all the time. And I miss errors because I know what I meant to write. Like, for instance, I'm the biggest you and your. I know the word is Y-O-U-R, and I will type in Y-O-U when it's supposed to be Y-O-U-R. I know the rule. I know it, but my brain just automatically types that. And so then I automatically read what I know should be there. So have somebody else read it. Have your advisory committee read your paper and critique it. That's why they're there. Submit on time. The thing about the publishing world is everything is they give you deadlines and you have to meet them. So there is a deduction for late submission, even if you have a valid reason for it being late. Make sure you look at the grading rubric so you can see what we're grading you on. If your paper is turned in on time and is of poor quality, it will be returned to you. You will be given specific instructions on what you need to do to correct it, and you will have until the end of the term to make those corrections. You will then also be deducted for a late submission because your quality of work was below. I will tell you, I had probably 7 people last term did not include an abstract because they didn't attend this meeting and they didn't go back and watch the recording. So they got their paper returned to them, and because it wasn't done properly, then they got a deduction. Maybe they turned it in and the abstract was okay, but then they got a deduction for a late submission because it was not done correctly. So make sure that you spend the time, look at the examples, listen to this recording, listen to it again if you need to, and make sure all the elements are there so I don't have to return a poor quality paperback. Luckily, none of the papers that I turned back had such poor quality writing. It was just they were missing abstracts. Any questions on that piece? So one thing that we've had in the past, and thank goodness this last term we did not have it, we have people just not turning things in on time because they have poor time management. And then that makes it very hard for us as faculty member because we have all those papers coming in week 10, and we have stragglers, then we're right up to the point that the grades are due. And if your paper's not in, we're going to have to give you an incomplete, and then you're not going to be able to be enrolled into the PA962 course. You're going to have to wait a term before you're able to enroll in that if you don't get your paper in and I don't get it graded. Any questions on that? Or anything?
Hi, Dr. Reed.
Uh-huh.
Hi, this is Taria.
Uh-huh.
Is there a minimum or maximum number of people that are required on our advisory committee?
Usually we recommend 2 to 3. Too many cooks in the kitchen make things complicated. Not enough cooks in the kitchen don't give you the broad feedback that you need.
Okay. And is it okay if that list has to change between 961 and 962?
Yes, absolutely. Like somebody will say, oh, so-and-so got called away to COVID duty or whatever. That's fine. And if the list changes, you don't specifically have to update me that the list changed. Again, this is academic steps, and it's in a real world, you never put down, oh, here's my advisory committee. We're doing it so we can see who you have, again, because we're in an academic program. But if it changes between 961 and 962, you don't have to update me. Just know that you want to build a team that's going to help you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Y'all, this is my daughter. I got her started early. I'm going to need a supervising physician someday when I get old, so I'm trying to start her young so she can go to medical school and be my supervising physician. So I'm going to stop this recording.